On June 12, 2020, the abandoned car of 22-year-old Naomi Richardson was found near Mount Rushmore. She, her sister Maya, and her boyfriend Dylan had disappeared, leaving behind only a broken phone and a car door that was wide open. For 35 days, they were searched for as victims of a brutal kidnapping, combing every crevice of the Black Hills forests. However, the sisters' unexpected appearance on a bus hundreds of miles from home turned the disappearance case into a tangled maze. What secret the abandoned Silver Peat quarry hid, and what really happened that fateful night among the granite rocks. You will find out in this video. The events in this story are presented as a narrative interpretation. Some elements have been altered or recreated for storytelling purposes. On June 12, 2020, at 9:30 in the morning, a silver SUV crossed the South Dakota state line, heading deep into the Black Hills National Forest. Inside were 3 young people whose disappearance would become one of the region's most mysterious secrets. 22-year-old Naomi Richardson, a final-year nursing student, was driving. In the interrogation reports, her teachers and friends described her as the epitome of sanity and restraint. She was the anchor that held the family together in moments of emotional crisis. Next to her was her younger sister, 19-year-old Maya, a talented artist with bright red hair who never parted with her sketchbook. Maya's friends remembered her as a real whirlwind of emotions, whose cheerfulness sometimes bordered on recklessness. But behind that smile, according to her friends, was a complex and ambiguous nature. The third passenger was Naomi's boyfriend, 23-year-old Dylan Flores. His devotion to his older sister seemed unwavering to others, and their couple was considered exemplary. According to the testimony of the sisters' parents, Arthur and Ellen Richardson, the last call from their daughters, came at 11:20 in the morning. Ellen later recalled in her official testimony that the conversation was full of joy. The girls planned to visit Mount Rushmore and drive along the picturesque but dangerous Iron Mountain Road. However, when the young people did not return to the hotel by 20 o'clock, as previously agreed, Ellen felt what she would later call an icy breath of fear that would not leave her for weeks to come. At 16 o'clock on June 12, 2020, a patrol ranger spotted Naomi's silver SUV parked on a narrow gravel roadside just off Iron Mountain Road. The vehicle was parked in a place that was not intended for long-term parking. According to the officer's report, both front doors were open, which looked extremely alarming in the mountainous terrain. A search of the passenger seat revealed a broken smartphone belonging to Maya, and Naomi's sunglasses were on the floor near the pedals. There were no signs of a struggle, signs of forced entry, or bloodstains inside. The keys were still in the ignition, and the trunk contained untouched backpacks with warm clothes and water. This created the illusion that the 3 people had just gotten out of the car for a minute and disappeared without a trace in the fog that enveloped the rocky slopes that evening. On the morning of June 13, 2020, a large-scale search and rescue operation was announced. More than 60 volunteers and a specialized group of experienced rangers were involved in the search. The search coordinator noted in his report that the Black Hills area is characterized by steep elevation changes and dense brush, with visibility of less than 10 feet in some places. The situation was exacerbated by dense fog that had been lingering in the gorges for several days, making the search team's work deadly. Helicopters equipped with state-of-the-art thermal imagers scanned a 10-mile radius of the vehicle's location daily. Despite the fact that the equipment is capable of detecting human body heat through dense vegetation, no signal was received. At night, the temperature dropped to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which significantly reduced the chances of survival without special equipment. The canine teams working on Iron Mountain Road reported a strange detail. The dogs confidently picked up the scent near the car, led it about 300 yards deep into the woods to a rocky outcropping, but the scent suddenly stopped there. It seemed that this was a dead sector where even professional equipment often failed. Over the next month, The area was combed meter by meter. Volunteers checked every crevice and abandoned mine, but nature gave no clues. The girls' parents stayed in a small motel 5 miles from the park entrance. The owner of the establishment later told investigators that he saw Arthur and Ellen every morning. They stood on the terrace, gazing at the mountains, hoping to see familiar silhouettes. The official conclusion of the investigators of that period, recorded in the case number 84219, sounds dry and hopeless. Naomi Richardson, Maya Richardson, and Dylan Flores went missing under unclear circumstances in an area with a high level of terrain complexity. By the end of June 2020, the intensive phase of the operation was wound down. The case gradually turned into another unsolved disappearance, leaving behind only an empty parking lot, faded postcards with the faces of young people, and silence, which in the mountains sometimes becomes much louder than any cries for help. The light that the 3 of them carried seemed to have faded forever in the cold South Dakota fog, leaving no scraps of cloth or broken branches to point their way. Naomi, Maya, and Dylan seemed to have become part of the forest itself, which knew how to reliably protect its dark secrets from prying eyes. On July 17, 2020, at 22 hours and 12 minutes, the usual stifling heat reigned at the remote border cross transit terminal in the arid border area near the state of Texas. It had been just over 35 days since Naomi Richardson's silver SUV was found abandoned on the side of Iron Mountain Road in South Dakota. While hundreds of federal agents and thousands of volunteers continued to comb the Black Hills forests, believing the 3 young people to be victims of a brutal kidnapping, the real story was unfolding 850 miles away. A terminal security officer, Carlos Mendez, who was conducting a routine check of passengers' documents before the departure of a night bus to Mexico, noted in his report that the 2 young women in the last row of seats were trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. They were wearing bulky men's jackets, despite the fact that the temperature that night did not drop below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. According to Mendez's testimony, the older of the girls, 22-year-old Naomi Richardson, was sitting by the window holding her younger sister, 19-year-old Maya's hand. A witness later recalled that Maya looked absolutely exhausted. Her skin had a sickly pale hue, and deep dark circles were visible under her eyes, indicating a long period of sleep deprivation. Carlos Mendez noted in the report that when he approached their row, Naomi began to frantically whisper something in her sister's ear, accompanied by sharp, short nods, as if giving instructions on how to proceed. When the guard asked for tickets and documents, Naomi slowly raised her head, and Mendez felt a chill go down his spine at the sight of her blank, almost glassy gaze. She stated in a broken voice that they had no documents because they had been robbed during the attack. At this point, Maya, according to the passengers sitting next to her, began to show signs of an acute panic attack. She squeezed into her seat and began to emit soft moans that resembled the sounds of a wounded animal. Mendez, suspecting something was wrong, immediately notified the local police about 2 suspicious women who might be victims of a crime or illegal migrants. At about 22 hours and 35 minutes, officers Miller and Collins arrived at the terminal. According to their report, as soon as the girls saw the men in uniform, Maya Richardson burst into hysterical crying. She rushed to the officers, assuring them through her sobs that they had just escaped from captivity, where they were being held by unknown men. Naomi, with surprising composure for such a situation, supported her sister's version, saying that they were being forced to the border for further sale into slavery. Officer Miller later noted in his notes that the girls looked like real fugitives. Their hair was tangled and dirty, and their clothes emitted a specific smell of dampness and cheap detergents. Naomi told the police at the station that they had managed to sneak out of the kidnapper's car at a small gas station when he was distracted by a phone call. She claimed that they ran through a wooded area for several miles until they saw the lights of the terminal and hopped on the first bus they saw, hoping to get lost among the passengers. Passengers on the flight recalled that Maya kept looking back at the bus door, as if expecting their tormentor to appear on the platform any moment. The police immediately put the terminal under heavy security, announcing an interception plan to search for an armed kidnapper wearing a dark hoodie. The girls were immediately removed from the flight and transferred to a locked staff room for initial questioning. Naomi Richardson, acting as a protector, kept her arm around her sister's shoulders, preventing the officers from asking Maya too many direct questions. When Officer Collins asked about the whereabouts of Dylan Flores, Maya started crying again, and Naomi only squeezed her hand tighter, closing the subject. According to the report of the search of the girls' personal belongings, nothing was found in their pockets except a few crumpled dollar bills and a small piece of paper with illegible numbers. At 23:45, the Richardson sisters were taken to the nearest medical center, Sunrise Medical, under escort by 2 patrol cars. The doctor on duty, Dr. Stevens, recorded in the admission log that the patients were in a state of critical psychophysical shock. Their pupils reacted painfully to the artificial light of the hospital corridor, and their skin had a waxy tint, typical of people who have not seen sunlight for a long time. While the sisters were preparing for a medical examination, the news of their sudden, miraculous rescue, 800 miles from the place of disappearance, was spread by all major TV channels in the country. Journalists had already begun to gather outside the hospital, creating an atmosphere of national sensation. However, investigators who arrived at Sunrise Medical an hour later noticed the first strange details in the girl's story. Officer Miller noted in his internal memorandum that despite their accounts of days of captivity, the sisters' wrists bore no telltale rope or shackle marks, and their shoes, while muddy, showed no signs of having run for miles over rough terrain. Every word the girls said about the terrible basement and the masked man sounded like a pre-rehearsed script, with each tear of Maya's coming at the exact moment the questions became too specific. As the girls' parents in South Dakota sobbed with joy at the news of their daughter's discovery, the Richardson sisters continued to hold hands in the darkness of the hospital room, knowing that their all-in game had just begun. That night, no one at Sunrise Medical realized that these 2 exhausted girls posing as rescued prisoners had brought with them a secret that could destroy many lives and change the course of the official investigation forever. The sensation-hungry public saw them only as victims, not noticing the cold determination in Naomi's eyes as she prepared for the next stage of their confession. On July 18, 2020, at 8 o'clock in the morning, the corridors of Sunrise Medical Hospital were filled with the hum of air conditioning and the muffled rustle of medical gowns. The air was filled with the persistent smell of isopropyl alcohol and latex, creating an atmosphere of sterile tension. On the detective's orders, the Richardson sisters were immediately separated into different wings of the facility. Naomi was placed in room 402 on the 4th floor, and Maya in the intensive care unit 2 levels down. This was done to prevent any coordination of their testimony. Naomi Richardson, who was 22 years old at the time, despite her apparent frailty, volunteered to give her first official statement to Detective Decker. According to the reconstruction protocol, she was half lying on the hospital bed, her fingers continuously fingering the edge of the white blanket, and her eyes fixed on a single point on the tiled wall. Naomi stated that on June 12, 2020, at about 16 o'clock, a man wearing a dark mask and dirty clothes approached them at a lookout point near Iron Mountain Road. According to her, he was holding a gun that looked like a heavy black large-caliber weapon. The witness claimed that the unidentified man ordered them to immediately get into his SUV, threatening to kill them on the spot. The most painful part of Naomi's story was the circumstances of the death of Dylan Flores, who was 23 years old. She told the detective through dry spasms in her throat that Dylan, trying to protect Maya, threw himself at the kidnapper when he tried to tie their hands. Naomi stated that she heard one short shot, after which Dylan fell to the ground and did not move. She claimed that this happened just a few miles from Mount Rushmore in the dense brush where the attacker had dragged them. For the next 35 days, according to both sisters, they were held in a dark, windowless basement where the cold and dampness were constant. Naomi described the place as a concrete box no larger than 10 by 12 feet, with an old mattress on the floor and a single metal bucket as the only furniture. She claimed that they completely lost track of time as the lights in the room were never turned on and food was thrown to them through a small crack in the door. Maya Richardson, who was 19 years old, repeated almost identical details in her ward, but her condition was much more unstable. The nurse who was present during her interview noted in the report that the girl constantly flinched at every sound outside the door and covered her face with her hands when it came to the masked man. However, it was during a detailed medical examination of Maya that Dr. Stevens noticed an anomaly that would later become key to the entire investigation. The doctor noted in medical record number 912 that despite the stories about the dark basement, the girl's back and shoulders had intense second-degree sunburns. The skin was bright red and had already begun to peel off in large patches in places, indicating prolonged exposure to direct sunlight for at least 6 hours a day over the past 4 or 5 days. Dr. Stevens noted in his report that such damage could not physically occur in a closed room, even with a small window. When the detectives, having received this information, asked Naomi again for clarification, she was not confused and added a new important detail to her story. She said she remembered a person who could have been their tormentor. According to her, shortly before the attack on Iron Mountain Road, they met a man from whom they borrowed a lighter. Naomi described him as a man in his mid-30s, wearing worn jeans and a dark cap, who had a very specific, piercing look. She claimed that he knew the area too well and asked strange questions about their route. The girls confidently stated that he could have been the monster who kidnapped them, as he saw that they were alone in the forest. This version of the man with the lighter became the central theme of their testimony that morning. Investigators noted that Naomi described it with surprising accuracy, even describing the silver color of the lighter and a small scar on the stranger's hand. At the same time, detectives noted the absence of characteristic rope marks or plastic ties on the girl's wrists and ankles, although both claimed to have been tied up at all times. The officer who stood guard outside Maya's room later recalled that the girl would sometimes become quiet and just look out the window at the sun, and her face would become strangely calm at such moments, which was completely inconsistent with the image of a victim who had just escaped from captivity. All of these contradictory details, the absence of physical signs of violence, intense sunburns, and the overly detailed description of a random passerby, began to create an atmosphere of distrust around the sisters among experienced detectives. The confession at Sunrise Medical Hospital, which was supposed to be the end of the tragedy, was actually the beginning of a complex intellectual battle between the police and the two girls, who tried to lead the investigation in the wrong direction with every word they said. That night, the hospital wards were silent, but for the investigators, that silence was full of questions that could not be answered in any forensic science textbook. While Richardson's parents were on the plane to the hospital, full of hope, detectives had already begun to gather evidence that suggested the South Dakota sun had seen much more than the sisters wanted to tell in that sterile silence of the hospital walls. Friends, before we dive into the darkest details of this discovery, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and like this video. Your activity is what makes YouTube's algorithms work and show this investigation to more people. On July 19, 2020, at 9:45 in the morning, the search operation in South Dakota took a new, fatal turn. While the Richardson sisters were under medical care in Texas, a group of volunteers and experienced rangers focused their attention on the abandoned Silver Peak Quarry, located 4 miles northwest of the main tourist route, Iron Mountain Road. The site has been officially closed to the public for over 30 years due to the high risk of granite landslides and deep sinkholes filled with standing rainwater. A ranger named Mark Stevens, who was the first to venture down to the bottom of the quarry, noted in his report number 813 that the area looked completely deserted, but his attention was drawn to an unnatural pile of fresh soil at the foot of the northern ledge. The area had been hastily strewn with dry pine branches and large pieces of limestone that were clearly out of place. As he descended to the bottom with the help of climbing equipment, Stevens smelled the characteristic smell of decomposition, which became unbearable in the humid air of the quarry. Under a layer of earth at a depth of only 2 feet, human remains were discovered. The site was immediately surrounded by yellow tape, and a team of forensic experts from the county center was called in to help. Over the next 48 hours, painstaking exhumation and initial examination was performed. 3 days later, after a comparison with dental records at the medical examiner's office, it was officially confirmed that the body was that of 23-year-old Dylan Flores. The news of Dylan's discovery instantly made headlines, but the details of the autopsy were much darker than anyone had anticipated. Experts found that the young man's death was not the result of a chaotic attack or a struggle with the kidnapper, as the sisters described in their testimony. One clear entry wound was found on the back of the skull. Ballistic analysis of the recovered bullet fragment confirmed that the shot was fired from a .22 caliber pistol. It is noteworthy that no other injuries were found on the body other than this single, surgically precise shot to the back of the head, fired from an extremely close distance of no more than 2 feet. During a thorough sifting of the soil near the gravesite, forensic experts found a single shell casing of the same caliber. The official conclusion of the investigation stated that the pattern of the murder was more like a cold-blooded execution than an attack with the intent to kidnap. The position of the body and the trajectory of the bullet indicated that Dylan Flores was probably on his knees or bent over heavily at the time of death, with no chance of seeing his killer. The pathologist's report stated that the death was instantaneous. This discovery in the abandoned Silver Peak quarry cast great doubt on every word of Naomi and Maya Richardson, who at the same time continued to talk about an armed maniac who allegedly opened fire indiscriminately at the observation deck. There was no sign of a mass fight or chaotic shooting in the Black Hills thicket, just a quiet and calculated shot in the darkness of the quarry. Rangers working at the site recalled that even the nature around Silver Peak seemed frozen, as if it itself was frightened by what had happened at the bottom of this chasm. Dylan's parents, having received the first results of the examination, refused to comment, but their lawyer noted that the condition of the body and the nature of the wound completely contradict the version of the boy's heroic death while protecting the girls. The quarry, which for years had only served as a place for rare extreme sports, suddenly turned into the main piece of evidence that silently testified against the rescued captives. Detective Decker, having received the ballistics report on his desk on July 23, 2020, realized that the .22 caliber weapon would be the key that would open the door to the true story of this journey. As the sun set behind the granite cliffs of South Dakota, forensic scientists continued to work under spotlights, scouring the dirt and rocks for the smallest details that would confirm or deny the words of the 2 girls sitting in sterile hospital rooms hundreds of miles away. Each microparticle found at the bottom of Silver Peak became a brick in the wall that gradually separated the sisters from their fictitious alibi. The body of Dylan Flores, hidden in an abandoned quarry, became the most reliable witness for the prosecution, whose wounds spoke much louder than any hysterical confessions in captivity. The investigation received facts that could not be ignored. The caliber, accuracy of the shot, and the place of burial indicated that the killer knew exactly what he was doing and had enough time to cover his tracks. The gloomy walls of the Silver Peak quarry kept the mystery of Dylan's last moments alive. But they could not hide the truth from those who were used to looking for answers in the silence of the crime scene. On July 22, 2020, at 9:30 in the morning, the investigation, which until then had seemed to be a logical confirmation of the Richardson sisters' words, suddenly reached a dead end, forcing the detectives to review every detail of case number 4789. After receiving a detailed description of the man with the lighter from Naomi and Maya, the task force, led by Detective Decker, focused all their efforts on identifying a person who perfectly fit the category of the prime suspect. That led law enforcement to 27-year-old Luca Ramirez, who lived in a rusted-out old trailer on the outskirts of Keystone Township, just 4 miles from Mount Rushmore National Memorial. His past, which included several arrests for minor offenses, and his appearance, rough, sun-damaged features, a worn denim jacket, and intimate knowledge of the woods, made him the perfect candidate for the brutal abductor the girls described. When patrol officers surrounded his temporary home at 10 o'clock in the morning, the air was filled with the tension inherent in the moment of arresting an armed criminal. During an authorized search of the cluttered trailer, which smelled of industrial oil, cheap coffee, and stale tobacco smoke, forensic experts found a firearm hidden in a metal toolbox. However, the first detailed examination of the find caused the detectives serious concern. According to the ballistics report, the recovered gun was a 9mm caliber, while the bullet found in the back of the head of 23-year-old Dylan Flores in the Silver Peak Quarry clearly belonged to a .22 caliber. This technical discrepancy was the first powerful blow to Naomi Richardson's testimony. At 13 hours and 15 minutes on the same day, the first official interrogation of Luca Ramirez began at the Pennington County Sheriff's Office. According to the testimony reconstruction protocol, the man behaved surprisingly calmly and did not deny the fact of meeting with 3 young men near Iron Mountain Road on June 12, 2020. Luke told investigators that he did indeed see Naomi, Maya, and Dylan that day near their silver SUV. According to him, they looked completely relaxed and even happy, not scared or worried. Ramirez confirmed in his testimony that the girls had approached him only to ask for a light, as their lighter had allegedly broken down. The witness claimed that they briefly talked about the upcoming weather change and the peculiarities of local routes, after which the 3 calmly walked further into the forest towards rocky outcroppings. Luca emphasized in his statement that he did not notice any signs of conflict or tension between the boy and the sisters. On the contrary, Dylan Flores looked like a man who fully trusted his companions. Moreover, a thorough forensic analysis of Ramirez's home and vehicle did not yield any positive results. The experts who worked in the trailer for 8 hours did not find a single fingerprint of Naomi or Maya, a single remnant of their clothing, or any biological traces of struggle that would inevitably remain after 35 days of forced confinement in a confined space. Detective Decker noted in his internal memorandum that the complete absence of microparticles or DNA from the alleged victims in such a confined space of less than 120 square feet was physically impossible. These facts forced the investigation to dramatically change the vector of the investigation. If Luca Ramirez was just a bystander who simply provided the girls with fire, then their detailed story of a masked monster, a dark basement, and a murder in front of their eyes began to fall apart like a house of cards. The inevitable and extremely disturbing question arose: were the Richardson sisters really telling the truth about what really happened in the shadow of the Black Hills granite cliffs? The discrepancy in the caliber of the weapon found, and the testimony of an eyewitness who completely denied any aggressive behavior, created long shadows of doubt that fell on the perfect image of the victimized girls. Each new ballistics report only reinforced the suspicion that the kidnapping story could only be a carefully constructed screen to hide a much darker truth. Investigators began to realize that the truth was not to be found in the biography of a random trailer occupant, but in the details of the sisters' lives, whose words increasingly resembled a complex maze of lies. In the offices of the State Police Department, they began to review the records of the first interrogations at Sunrise Medical Hospital again, looking for the same small logical failures that had previously seemed unimportant against the background of the overall tragedy. The case of the disappearance finally transformed into an intense psychological duel where the main figures were not external enemies, but the victims themselves. The shadows of doubt grew longer and longer, covering the sun that had left its marks on the younger sister's shoulders so untimely. And now law enforcement officials were preparing to ask the girls questions that would be impossible to hide from behind tiers or fictional basements. Naomi and Maya, still under guard in a Texas hospital, had no idea that the found .22 caliber shell casing had already begun to destroy their alibi, and that Luca Ramirez was just an accidental victim of their dangerous diversionary strategy. The investigation was preparing for a new stage, where every word had to be weighed against ballistics and irrefutable physical facts that had nothing to do with their legend of capture. The emptiness in Ramirez's trailer was far more eloquent than any cries for help, indicating to the detectives that the real killers were still under their protection, pretending to be terrified prisoners in sterile hospital rooms. On July 24, 2020, the investigation into the Mount Rushmore disappearance found itself in a situation that detectives would later call an information vacuum. Luca Ramirez's complete alibi and the absence of any physical evidence of his presence with the girls over the past month forced Detectives Decker and his team back to square one. The case number 4789 required a completely new approach, as the external enemy theory was becoming more and more like a mirage created to distract attention. Starting on July 25, 2020, the task force made a strategic decision to change the vector of the investigation, focusing all resources on auditing the last days of the trio's lives before they left for South Dakota. Investigators obtained a court order for full access to Naomi and Maya Richardson's financial transactions, hoping to find a clue that would point to a secret identity that might be stalking them or share common interests with them. However, the results of the analysis obtained from the bank's headquarters were much darker than anyone could have anticipated. According to bank statements, 3 days before her fatal departure, on June 9, 2020, Naomi Richardson made a highly unusual transaction. She withdrew $850 in cash from her savings account through a terminal on the outskirts of town, 5 miles from her residence. A subsequent search through private forums and analysis of online classified ads led detectives to a man named Arthur Gill, a private seller of used firearms. On August 11, 2020, Arthur Gill gave an official sworn statement to the sheriff's office. The witness confidently identified both sisters from the photographs presented. According to him, Naomi and Maya arrived at his house together in an old SUV, and it was Naomi who negotiated the purchase. The witness confirmed that for $800, he sold the girl a used Ruger .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Hill noted in the report that the girl seemed surprisingly calm and determined, and Naomi even checked the bolt mechanism herself, demonstrating her knowledge of the basics of gun handling. This fact was the fatal blow to the whole legend of the surprise attack on the observation deck. The presence of a weapon of the specific caliber used to kill Dylan Flores in the Silver Peak Quarry finally moved the Richardson sisters from the status of victims to the status of prime suspects in the murder case. The investigators were faced with a question that did not fit in the minds of experienced operatives. What could make two young girls, one of whom was preparing to become a nurse and the other an artist, plan the cold-blooded execution of a loved one? Detective Decker, in his report of July 28, 2020, noted that the purchase of the gun a few days before the trip was indisputable evidence of pre-planning, not a coincidence or a sudden act of passion. It was a carefully crafted scenario where every step, from choosing the caliber of the weapon to faking the kidnapping, was intended to provide them with a perfect alibi. However, while police officers were analyzing bullet trajectories and bank receipts, a completely different play was going on in the sterile wards of Sunrise Medical Hospital. Maya and Naomi Richardson continued to flawlessly play the roles of deeply traumatized prisoners. In their daily reports, the medical staff noted that the girls were constantly startled by loud noises and refused to fall asleep without the lights on. Maya tearfully told the volunteers about the terrible cold of the basement and the rough hands of the kidnapper, who allegedly deprived them of everything. According to staff witnesses, the sisters stuck strictly to their version of the monster, having previously agreed on every detail of the legend in case they were ever found. They skillfully played on the public's sympathy, unaware that the financial trail and the testimony of the arms dealer had already begun to tighten the noose around their perfect escape. The contrast between their emotional confessions and the cold numbers of the bank transactions grew starker, turning each new tear of Maya's into yet another piece of circumstantial evidence of their cold-blooded plot. The investigation had answered the who question, but the why question still hung in the air, as heavy and dangerous as the fog over the Black Hills on that fateful June night. Each new fact only emphasized that behind the facade of a broken phone and an open car door was an abyss that the Richardson sisters had tried to hide with Dylan's body and fictionalized stories of captivity. Now Detective Decker had only to find a way to get them to admit what the documents and ballistics had already confirmed, breaking down the wall of silence they had so diligently built during their 35 days in hiding. On July 30th, 2020, at 11:30 in the morning, a heavy, almost tangible silence reigned within the sterile walls of Sunrise Medical Hospital, broken only by the monotonous hum of medical equipment and the distant noise behind closed doors. Detective Decker, accompanied by 2 sheriff's deputies, entered room 402, where Naomi Richardson was being held. His face showed none of the compassion she had been accustomed to seeing from the staff she had grown accustomed to seeing from the staff in recent days. According to the official investigation records, the detective placed several laminated photographs and a printout of a bank statement on the metal bedside table without any preamble. The first photo clearly showed a copy of a bank check for $850, signed in Naomi's hand 3 days before their trip. Next to it was a detailed ballistics description of a Ruger .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol, the same weapon that had been used in the Silver Peak quarry. At this point, as the detective later noted in his report, the mask of the frightened victim that the 22-year-old had so diligently maintained for 35 days began to rapidly crumble. In the next wing of the hospital, Maya Richardson was confronted with even more devastating evidence. Detectives showed her surveillance footage from a gas station in Wyoming, 41 miles from their alleged captivity. The video clearly captured Luca Ramirez, the man the sisters accused of kidnapping, at the very time they claimed he was supposed to be holding them locked up. This indisputable alibi turned every word the girls said into a cynical slander. In addition, Maya's physical condition, namely intense second-degree sunburns on her shoulders and back, finally put an end to the legend of the dark concrete basement. In his medical report number 814, Dr. Stevens noted that such thermal injuries could only have occurred as a result of hours of exposure to the direct rays of the July sun, which was impossible indoors. Realizing that the maze of lies had finally closed, Naomi Richardson was the first to break her silence. According to the interrogation report, her voice became cold and devoid of emotion. She said that the motive for the crime was the uncontrollable rage she felt when she learned about her boyfriend, 23-year-old Dylan Flores, having a secret relationship with her younger sister Maya. Naomi confessed that the shot in the back of the head at the bottom of the abandoned Silver Peak quarry was not an accident or the result of a struggle. It was the final scene of an elaborate execution scenario. In order to secure a new future for herself and her sister in Mexico, Naomi ordered 2 fake IDs in the names of Sarah and Emma Thompson through anonymous online forums a few weeks before the trip. These documents were carefully hidden in the lining of their hiking backpacks before they left home. When the girls were detained on a bus near the Texas border, they tried to pass off the IDs as a gift from their kidnapper, who was allegedly preparing them for sale. The girls' subsequent confession revealed startling details of their survival in the wild. For 35 days, they were not held captive, but were professionally hiding in the wilds of the Black Hills National Forest. Naomi explained that they had taken a large supply of canned goods, protein bars, and water filters from her parents' pantry in advance, setting up a secret camp in a rock recess 3 miles from Silver Peak. In her testimony, Maya recalled how they heard the roar of Bell 407 search helicopters every day and saw the beams of thermal imagers scanning the area. At such moments, the girls would cover themselves with special thermal blankets they had purchased with their guns to become invisible to the sensors. They waited patiently until the intensive phase of the search operation was over and the Rangers began to wind down their roadblocks. When active searching in the Iron Mountain Road area almost ceased on the 32nd day, the sisters walked 14 miles over rough terrain, avoiding major roads. Naomi admitted that the idea to blame Luca Ramirez came spontaneously when they remembered the man from whom they had borrowed the fire. His unkempt appearance and status as a lone traveler made him the perfect target for slander, which was to become their main alibi. Every detail of this escape from captivity, from the broken phone in the car to the theatrical tears on the bus, was part of a single plan to make sure that they emerged from the woods not as murderers, but as heroic victims. However, the South Dakota sun, which left its fiery marks on Maya's skin, and the paper trail of an $800 gun purchase became the silent witnesses that the girls could not bribe or intimidate. Their confession at Sunrise Medical Hospital documented how the carefully constructed illusion crumbled under the pressure of objective truth, leaving behind only the grim truth of betrayal, a shot to the back of the head, and 35 days in the forest, where fear was replaced by cold calculation. On January 12, 2021, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the final trial began in the Rapid City District Court in South Dakota, where it was supposed to bring closure to a disappearance and murder case that had shaken the entire country. Courtroom 402 was packed with members of the press, relatives of the victim, and local residents who had been lining up at the entrance since 5 o'clock in the morning, despite the chilling winter wind. The state's case against Naomi and Maya Richardson, number 84,219, has become a symbol of how deep the chasm behind the facade of an ordinary American family can be. In his opening statement, the prosecutor emphasized that this was not a crime committed in a state of passion, but a carefully thought-out operation where every step, from choosing an abandoned quarry to simulating a kidnapping, was part of a cold-blooded plan. The investigation provided the court with an irrefutable package of evidence, which included a ballistic examination of the Ruger .22 caliber pistol, bank transaction records of $850 in cash withdrawals, and a detailed chronology of survival in the forest recreated using seized digital media. The main blow for the defense was the heartfelt confession of the younger sister, 19-year-old Maya, who during the hearing on January 20, 2021, described every minute of their journey. She described how Naomi prepared for the massacre, how she coldly chose the location of the Silver Peak quarry, and how she forced Maya to help bury the body under the threat of the same reprisal. Based on these facts and additional evidence of planning to flee to Mexico, Judge Thomas Ellis made the final decision. The older sister, 22-year-old Naomi Richardson, as the main organizer of the crime and the person who directly purchased the weapon and fired the fatal shot to the back of the head of 23-year-old Dylan Flores, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The court ruled that she would not be eligible for parole during the first 20 years of her sentence. Naomi was found guilty of second-degree murder, unlawful possession of a firearm, and intentional tampering with evidence to mislead the investigation. According to the testimony of the bailiffs, Naomi showed no emotion during the verdict, Her face remained motionless, and her gaze was directed into the void in front of her. 19-year-old Maya Richardson was sentenced to 12 years in prison, taking into account her age, her role as an accomplice, and her active cooperation with the justice system. The psychological examination involved in the case confirmed that the girl had a pathological emotional dependence on her older sister, which was taken into account as a mitigating circumstance. A separate item of the meeting was the official dismissal of all charges against 27-year-old Luca Ramirez. Although the man regained his legal freedom, his lawyer noted in a press statement that the 3-week status of prime suspect in the brutal murder and public harassment left an irreversible mark on his psyche and destroyed his social reputation in the town of Keystone. For the sisters' parents, Arthur and Ellen Richardson, the court verdict was only the beginning of an eternity of mourning. According to family friends, the couple was forced to sell their home and move to another state, unable to withstand the daily stares from neighbors and accusations that they had raised monsters. They left behind empty rooms and the memory of a life that was split in two in the year 2020. Dylan Flores was buried in the city cemetery in a closed coffin, and his grave at the foot of the hill became a place of pilgrimage for friends who could never understand the reason for such a cruel betrayal. The abandoned Silver Pete Quarry, where the mystery of the last shot remained forever in the cold granite, was officially closed to any visitors by the authorities. Now its territory is fenced off with a high fence and warning signs, becoming a grim monument to human hatred in the middle of the wilderness. In the penal colony, Maya Richardson has returned to her sketchbook, but now her paintings are not vivid landscapes, but fragmentary, disturbing images of the Black Hills forest and the gray walls of the quarry where time has stopped for them all. Each of her drawings, according to prison psychologists, is an attempt to escape from the reality where she remained an accomplice to the murder of her own love. This story, which began with the open door of an SUV on Iron Mountain Road, has become a grim warning to South Dakotans. Real monsters don't always come out of the thick fog of the woods. Sometimes they sit at your dinner table for years, planning every move of their deadly game. Under the cold light of truth that finally shone on the Richardson sisters' case, it became clear that the granite giants of Mount Rushmore had not seen a kidnapping, but a cold-blooded execution that could not be justified by any feelings. The case was officially closed, leaving behind only silence in the courtroom and emptiness in the hearts of those who once knew these girls as ordinary students. Naomi and Maya became mere numbers in the penal system, forever losing the right to the new life for which they decided to pull the trigger on a .22 caliber pistol in that fateful June darkness. The tragedy at Silver Peak forever changed the map of the national forest, adding to its roots one trail that no one will ever dare to follow again.